10 seconds from now, a dying sun will flare like a wound reopening, a radar wall will blossom with ghosts, and a commander will hear the truth about his victories. They are paid for by people he will never meet. Stay with me to the last line, because only then will I tell you the single name he speaks when he decides which civilization must vanish, forever. They called him Cassian Varo. On paper, Fleet Commander, Commonwealth Third Arm, cool under fire, 36 engagements, exemplary loss ratios. Off paper, something else. A pulse that hummed between seconds. A gaze that made astronomers look away, as if he saw the field equations behind their faces. He wore an icon on a chain that nobody in the fleet could identify, an 8-pointed star carved in stone that swallowed light. Cassian was quasar-blooded. Long before star charts learned our names, the universe told stories about beings who could coax light from dead nuclei and quiet a star with a hush. We turned them into gods. The gods turned themselves into secrets. One of them took human shape for a season and left a child among us, then ran from the pantheon and the sentence they passed on him. That child grew up on a mining station that smelled like rust and cinnamon, and when he laughed near the reactor, the dials twitched. The war made myth useful again. The enemy called themselves the Radiant Hegemony, a people who believe that if you can teach a weapon to worship, it will never jam. They built cruisers like altars and missiles like prayers. Their first doctrine was simple: find our suns, pull their fuses, watch our NAV charts turn to ash. They did it once, twice, too many times, until every admiral in the three arms started speaking in future tenses like superstition could bargain time back. Then Cassian lit a star. Not with fuel. With intention. He stood on a forward deck wrapped in hazard glass and asked a red dwarf to remember its fury. It did. A failing sun swelled and roared, a hegemony line cracked, and a fleet that expected dusk met noon. Command promoted him in public and gave him a code name in private: First Light. Here's what nobody told the broadcasts, and everyone in Cassian's circle learned the hard way: power writes invoices. The first time he woke the fire in a star, a listening post in a nearby spiral reported a weird absence. Signal beacons that had pinged for centuries went quiet. The second time, an archaeologist cried quietly at her console because a whole language dropped out of her database like it never existed. By the fifth, the Commonwealth founded a new office, the Archive of Absences, to count the holes. Elian Mara ran it. Elian loved maps the way some people love cities. Not the lines. The stories those lines implied. They could walk through a grid of coordinates and tell you which worlds smelled like rain after iron, which stations brewed coffee that tasted like burnt walnut and apology, which dust lanes made pilots superstitious. Elian found the pattern Cassian didn't want to see. Every time he lit a star, somewhere in the multiverse, a civilization went out like a candle. Not his universe. Not here. A branch that braided with ours for a few seconds at a time. A neighbor reality where someone had drawn roads with slightly different curves, told myths with different endings, loved with the same stubbornness but to another name. Each ignition took a life that never crossed our path, and yet bled into it in the way music through a wall can still move you. Don't you dare call them collateral, Elian said in Cassian's cabin after the seventh burn, hands on the table, voice steady because one of them had to be. They are not a statistic. They are a cost. And costs get paid by someone. He wanted to argue. He didn't. He took off the chain with the starstone and set it between them. I didn't ask to be born like this. No one asks, Elian said. Some of us just get the bill with our birth certificates. By the ninth ignition, the hegemony learned the trick we never meant to teach them. The absences weren't just tragedy, they were beacons. Extinctions in neighbor branches lined up with ripples in vacuum like breadcrumbs. The hegemony started riding those ripples, slipping through dead sky corridors the rest of us didn't know existed. Every time Cassian saved a system here, the enemy used the echo of that act to fall behind our next line. Command called it proof that miracles need managers. They wrote new rules around Cassian's throat. No unsanctioned ignition. No ignition without predictive clearance. No ignition within 5 light days of human habitation. He signed the orders with a hand that had trouble holding pens after engagements. His bones vibrated after he used what lived inside him. Sometimes the spoon he lifted hummed low like a tuning fork. What kept him from throwing the chain away and walking into the quiet? Elian. And the miners who sent him a box of candles after the third battle, with a note that said, "We like the lights you pick." And the message from a refugee freighter that said simply, "Whoever you are, you bought my daughter's 8 birthdays. I owe you 8 favors." When the hegemony deployed the cruciform gate, Cassian knew they were done being patient. Imagine a cathedral built out of searing mathematics, 4 arms pinned to neutron anchors, a door that opens only when you extinguish 3 suns in a prime number sequence. They aimed it at Cape Station, thin metal, thick lives, the Commonwealth's trading lung. Elian showed Cassian the projection. "If they open it," Elian said, "we get a choir of radiation and ships in our kitchen. We lose the arm in hours. We lose the war in days." "What stops it?" Cassian asked. Elian swallowed. "A tricordial ignition at the gate's hinges. You light 3 dwarf stars at once, force the arms to flex against their own geometry, and the door shatters. You can do it. Maybe only you can do it." He stared at the map until it blurred. "And the cost?" Elian didn't look away. "That's how you know who your people are. 3 disappearances. 3 branches go dark. 3 somewheres mourn what they won't remember losing. Here's where stories usually hand you a loophole. A hack. A trick. A technobabble mercy. I won't." Cassian didn't get one. He got the truth, too heavy to lift, and the only thing that keeps your hands from shaking. He tried to sleep. He walked the observation ring until his pulse matched the hum of the hull. He held the stone on his chain, and, because he was very tired and finally done lying to himself, he spoke to the thing that hummed back. "Father," he said. Not a metaphor. A fact. The banished star being who had chosen a human season and left Cassian behind like a comet leaves a meteor shower. Cassian didn't remember the face. He remembered the lullaby, a frequency more felt than heard, the way it made his nightlight dim and brighten like a heartbeat. The Pantheon had hunted his father across realities for the crime of loving us. Cassian had inherited a power meant to repair a broken sky and found himself breaking lives to save other lives. If you can't feel the weight of that, take another breath and try again. He went to Elian. "What if the thing that disappears," he said carefully, "isn't strangers? What if I make it mine?" Elian frowned. "Cass, my kind," he said, and the word hurt, as if it had barbs. "The Starborn. The Pantheon. The remnants. The lineage that made me. If a civilization must vanish when I ignite, then let it be the one that taught me to do this. End the beacons. End the tracking. End the clause in the treaty that says he is a weapon. Make me the last. After this, I'm nobody special. We win or lose like people again. You can't know the math," Elian said, voice breaking on the parts science doesn't steady. "You can't target the cost." "I can ask?" he said, and looked at the stone until it didn't look like a stone anymore. It looked like a door. You only ever find those when you're willing to walk through. The gate woke. You could feel it 3 arms away, a migraine in the bones of stations, a shiver in old ships that had seen better wars. Hegemony choirs sang, and the void leaned in to listen. Command asked for updates every 60 seconds. Admirals practiced sentences that started with, "if," and ended with, "We tried." Cassian stood on the forward deck where he'd first asked the star to burn for him. He felt Elian beside him without looking, hands close enough to touch, not quite touching. He closed his eyes and went where the fire lived, to the place inside him that wasn't flesh or thought, the chamber that remembered everything all at once. He found the 3 dwarfs, a triangle in a sea of black. He found the hinge song, the wrong angle the gate forced the universe to hold. He found, farther still, a brightness you can't look at with eyes, only with the part of you that trusts someone else to catch you. The Pantheon. Not people. Not exactly. Pressure that had learned to sing. Intent that had grown tired of being narrative, and went looking for hands. They noticed him. Of course they did. He was the child who kept leaving home by saving strangers. He spoke, not with words, with the shape of a promise. Take me. And us. Close the account I've been drawing on since I learned to make a fuse remember its spark. Let the cost fall where the debt began. The fire listened the way oceans listen, to gravity, to the moon, to the oldest request in the world, please. He opened his eyes. Elian, he said. I'm here, they said. If this works, I won't be special anymore. Elian exhaled like a person choosing to be brave without witnesses. Good, they said. I didn't fall in love with a miracle. I fell in love with you. It's funny what sentences hold a person together. Sometimes they're not the ones we expect. 3, Cassian said. 2, Elian said. 1. He ignited the dwarfs. There are noises ships make that we have no words for. The first was a chord, like steel remembering it used to be a bell. The second was a quiet so deep you could hear your own blood choose to continue. The third was a kind of relief that made older officers look younger for a heartbeat. The cruciform gate arched, flexed, begged geometry for one more second, and shattered along the lines he'd drawn in his mind. The hegemony's cathedral flickered and folded, their altars turning, in an instant, into what altars always become when the story is done with them, metal. In the archive of absences, 3 cities Elian had mapped blinked out of the neighbor branch like they had never been. The lists adjusted. The graphs breathed. Then something else happened that none of the models had allowed as possible. A count dropped to 0. Not 3. All. The Pantheon's signatures, everywhere Elian had found their fingerprints across the branches, flattened to noise. The background hum you learn to ignore because it's always been there, wasn't. The gods of light, the singers of ignition, the beings who used to carry newborn physics until it could walk, were gone. And Cassian's chain went cold. He didn't fall. He didn't die. He stayed on his feet, hands steady, breath slow. He looked, for the first time since he was a child, ordinary to himself. The world didn't tilt to accommodate him. The deck didn't hum back when he pressed his palm to it. Elian laughed, and covered their mouth like you do when joy scares you. You did it, they said, tears catching light. You ended the beacons. We ended my people, he said softly, and tasted the sentence like medicine, bitter and saving. The hegemony lost their road. Marin reported from the pit, voice shaky with the secrecy finally allowed to feel. They're stuck. They're running. Command wanted parades. Elian let them. Cassian stood on the edge of the celebration and learned how to inhabit a body that didn't sing without being asked. He learned how to lose a privilege he hadn't asked for and not mistake the grief for regret. He learned to watch sunsets without wondering if they were listening. The war didn't end that day. Wars never give you clean thirds acts. But the hegemony had built a strategy on our miracles, and when the miracles retired, their equations forgot how to solve themselves. We lost more people. We lost less often. We rebuilt with hands and patience instead of prayers that pretended to be math. The archive of absences stayed open. Elian kept counting, not to tally guilt, but to remember honesty. Some nights, they would sit with Cassian under the dim lights of a station bar that made drinks too strong and pretended not to notice heroes. They would read him names, all the names they didn't have, the stories they could guess, the city that baked bread with rosemary in the mornings, the island where weddings used kites instead of rings, the tower where a child learned to whistle in minor keys. They made a ritual of gratitude. It wasn't penance. It was respect. Once, on a day that started with bad coffee and a better joke, Elian found the chain on the table and the stone missing from it. Couldn't carry it anymore? They asked. Cassian shook his head. Didn't need it to remember, he said. And I don't want anyone to mistake me for a door again. What did you say? Elian asked, gentle curiosity, no demand. When you chose? He held their gaze for a long time. He thought of that chamber, the oldest brightness, the long-owed promise. He thought of a lullaby that tuned his childhood to frequencies you can't teach with words. He said the name now, for both of them, for you, for the record that isn't written but is carried. Father, if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel the cost behind a victory, tap like so it finds the next person who needs it. Subscribe to travel with me through more universes where impossible choices shape ordinary lives. Tell me in the comments, would you pull the last miracle if the price was your own kind?